Hi, I'm
Perfect.
Brian Kary. I'm the TSMO Director for the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and share with you today about our strategic plan development as well as our tactical plans that we'll be kind of moving into here as our next phase. So a little history. We're kind of taking a new effort of our TSMO planning process. We actually started a number of years ago, finalizing a TSMO strategic plan back in 2019, and we had a couple of other related plans as well at that point in time. So we had a CAV strategic plan that was also developed in 2019. That really looked at any kind of work that we're going to do related to CAV and was intended to have kind of a 5-year vision. Then we had an ITS statewide plan that was done in 2015, so that one was getting quite dated. And then also as I said, the TSMO plan that was broken up into 3 different levels of a strategic plan, an implementation plan, and a business plan. So a couple of years back, we decided that we were going to kind of take a new, fresh look at all 3 of these. We also looked at kind of our organizational structure as well. In fact, putting our CAV group underneath TSMO and creating a TSMO office. So that's kind of relatively new as part of this whole kind of planning process. But we ended up doing was we created a TSMO strategic plan that was more of an overarching plan that would look at all of our ITS and CAV related needs and other TSMO related strategies. And so we rewrote our strategic plan in 2024, so wrapped it up just last summer, and really with that intent of looking at a broad set of operational strategies to help improve safety and efficiency and mobility across our transportation network. As part of that, we looked at our goals and objectives of the overall TSMO program. A lot of this was pretty similar to what we had in the previous plan, but we did do some modifications to it. So our 3 goals are one related to safety, the safety of the public as well as the workers in the right of way. We really put a lot of emphasis on our own employees this time, in addition to the public. So that was a little bit of a change in the new rewrite. And then in the second goal, really looking at that reliability, mobility, and efficiency, but also really trying to be purposeful in terms of including some of the other modes that maybe the other TSMO plan was a little bit too focused on vehicle traffic, but wanting to look at bike and pedestrian and transit as well. Not to say that it wasn't in the other previous plan, but really drawing more attention to that as part of this plan, and and hoping that will kind of set the path forward for identifying strategies in those areas. And then the last goal was more centered around asset management of our TSMO devices. And that's certainly a piece of that still. But we kind of broadened that one too, to look at more of the integration and sustaining of a TSMO program across the agency, so that it's not just in my office of the TSMO office, but that TSMO is really kind of seen as a philosophy that extends across the entire department. So this gets a little bit into the actual objectives related to each one of the goals, and I'm certainly not going to read through all this because there's a lot of words there, but it's all available on our website if you go to MnDOT's TSMO site, where you can download the strategic plan. But just kind of calling out some of those areas I've highlighted there and underlined in red. Just showing kind of some of the real focus areas of this plan, maybe compared to the previous plan, really stressing that for all users, for, the safety of our MnDOT employees, as well as our partners and maybe contractors that are working within the right of way. Could be construction contractors or like emergency responders and such. So again, just kind of calling that emphasis out. And then the same thing, like when I talked about the mobility goal, really kind of highlighting those multimodal type aspects of it, more so than the previous plan did. And then the third goal, of really kind of fostering that culture of TSMO across the department, and really, still kind of focusing in on that asset management aspect, and having ties to our transportation asset management plan, and making sure that we can adequately, maintain and operate and upgrade our systems that we already have before we really look at kind of expanding it. So making sure we don't create new larger gaps in terms of asset management by just deploying new and not identifying the needs for our existing systems. So that's kind of it for the strategic plan. And then the next step that we're kind of phasing into now is a development of our tactical plans. And as part of these tactical plans, we've identified 7 program areas, and those are listed there on the screen. I won't read through those necessarily, but our goal is to really identify the various kind of strategies or deployment projects that we might want to do in each one of these areas. So we're kind of gradually staggering into the development of these tactical plans, getting some consultant support to do that. And we've kicked off 4 of them right now. We've got the traffic management, the traveler information, the CAV, and the work zone management underway. And the other 3 we'll probably hold off until like maybe sometime in the summer or fall, so that we don't have 7 plans kind of going at the same time, just in terms of workload. As part of our initial strategic plan process, when we had a contractor or consultant on board to help develop that strategic plan, they helped us identify what those tactical plans would be that I just talked about. But they also developed this framework document that goes along with the strategic plan to kind of help provide some guidance, so that as we develop those tactical plans, that they're kind of are developed more uniformly. And so this is kind of just a general outline of what would be needed for within those tactical plans. So really, identifying what the tactical plan is intended to cover, what the scope of it is, what maybe its own vision, goals, and objectives are that relate back to the original strategic plan, and then how it relates to the other tactical plan areas. Like for example, traveler information, we might look at like how do we provide better work zone data out on our 511 system, as well as like to our mapping partners like say Google and Apple Maps. But before we get there, we might have to look at smart devices that we'd want to deploy in work zones. And so the work zone management plan might look at kind of like, okay, what do we need to get the data from the field? And then the traveler information one would be is, okay, now that we've got that data from the field, how do we get that out to the masses? So that would be just one example of the many relationships that there's probably going to be between the various tactical plans. And then from there, we'll look at kind of doing some challenges and gap identification, try to prioritize where we do investments, start identifying those various strategies and actions that we want to deploy, doing a capability maturity matrix exercise to maybe identify some of that as well, and then doing kind of that final analysis and budget estimating to come up with a tactical plan in that particular program area. As I mentioned, we are certainly looking to try to get some contractor support for it. So we're going to hire a oversight contractor, which is actually going to be the same contractor that helped us develop the strategic plan and that framework. And then we'll have various tactical plan contractors for the 7 plans. Actually, not quite all 7 plans. A couple of them we're going to do in-house. The CAV one and possibly the incident management one, but the other ones are going to be contractor ones. But the intent is to kind of have a circular process here where the oversight contractor will maybe help kind of refine that framework and actually develop a more detailed template, and then kind of help with some of those plan relationships so that everybody kind of knows what they're working on and how they relate to each other. Certainly doing that in collaboration with the various working groups and contractors, so that we don't miss anything. But then they'll also help provide kind of a technical review and copy editing of the final documents so that they kind of look like they've been developed by one author, so that they all roll up into kind of one package, if you will. And then on the other side, the tactical plan contractors, they're going to be supporting that working group development, doing that stakeholder meetings, really kind of gathering the content and then providing that content then back to the oversight contractor to do kind of the final development of the plans. So shifting gears a little bit here, in addition to kind of developing these plans as part of that process, we're going to look at kind of trying to do more of a performance-based monitoring or performance-based kind of planning, I guess, starting off with that as to where we want to do our TSMO developments, but also looking at like what kind of performance measures we want long-term to then measure the success of our various TSMO projects. But one of the ways to kind of get there in terms of the planning process, we stole this from our friends in Iowa. So I think I saw Tim on the line. So thank you, Tim. And I've mentioned this a few times that, this is one of those R&D, the rip off and duplicate applications. So Iowa had this ISOP score that we're kind of adopting and turning into our own Minnesota TSMO score, with looking at various criteria, and the criteria criteria listed here are what Iowa used. We'll probably have a slight variation to that. And then trying to start to populate a map like you see there on the left. Up until just yesterday, I had always showed Iowa's version. Now I can finally show a map of Minnesota, but it's still pretty draft yet. And this is showing like where a lot of spinouts are related to winter weather. So in addition to looking at like crash rates and looking at kind of those, more typical crashes, I guess, if you will. We wanted to kind of see, would this tell us something different if we look at like spinouts and kind of those weather related events that don't necessarily get a crash report because there might not have been property damage, but are still things that our state patrol officers have to respond to. And would that inform us of something different that we wouldn't have expected? So we're still kind of in the process of that, but that's just kind of one example of how we want to look at this from many different ways to maybe identify the right strategy for the right location. And then this is just talking about how it relates to some of our other plans. We have a set of family of plans across the department, a lot of multimodal plans, highway investment plans, bike plans, pedestrian plans, freight plans, et cetera. So, as we're developing things for like, say, signal operations, we're certainly going to be looking at, how do we operate that signal more efficiently? What kind of maybe new technologies we want to look at that? But we'll also look at, what kind of bike and pedestrian accommodations we have, or what kind of advantages for transit. But we also want to make sure that those handshake well with some of these other plans that are being developed that are maybe specific to those different modes. So we're working with our planning office to ensure kind of that uniformity so that the TSMO plan fits into kind of the or helps kind of benefit this larger list of family of plans. And then also making sure that as these plans get developed, that they also reflect kind of that TSMO mindset. Like a lot of in the freight plan talks about truck parking and the need for truck parking, and certainly that's in there already, but kind of tying that back then to TSMO, just like we'll be tying our plan to their plan. And then another one I mentioned earlier with the transportation asset management plan, or TAMP. We've actually incorporated our ITS and signal components into the TAMP over the last several iterations of that. And so just continuing to do that. And we have, this is kind of a long list of like everything that's in there as ITS assets. And so we're tracking like, where our fiber, our shelters, our network equipment, our devices like cameras and signs and detection, and making sure that those are adequately tracked in TAMs and seen as a valued asset to the department, and what it's going to take to kind of bridge that gap to make sure that we can maintain what is existing. So kind of like I said earlier, we want to make sure that we can maintain what exists before we really kind of look at that expansion aspect too, because there's some pretty significant kind of funding gaps in terms of just maintaining the life cycle of these devices, and keeping things to the latest technology as well. And especially as we look ahead to CAV, what is needed to do with our signal systems, like what do we need to get our signal systems to the current level of technology before we even think about kind of the future needs of technology and related to CAV vehicles. So with that kind of wraps up where we're at, just kind of transitioning to that tactical planning mode, and trying to tie it into some of our existing plans and looking at this kind of bigger picture. So we've still got a lot of work ahead of us. It probably sounds like we've done a lot more than what we truly have. I think we're just still trying to find that path and starting to work our way down the path here as we develop our TSMO program further.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Two questions for you. The first one is on your tactical plans. Is there any type of prioritization on those plans, just from an internal perspective?
Not officially. I mean, the way I have them listed there is in really no priority order. We'll go back to that slide there. But we have kind of kicked off on a few of them just based on maybe some conversations about like, oh, we should really kind of get going with that one. And some of that was our traffic management system plan, trying to get a little better handle of like where we want to do our ITS deployments out on some of especially on some of the rural routes. And so that one probably raised to the surface and was one of the first ones that we kind of try to get a consultant on board, and that one is underway. But then, as I mentioned, we kind of skipped down to traveler information, and we skipped down to work zone, and we skipped down to CAV. And so it was, maybe a little bit based on need, but also sometimes based on availability of staff, like the CAV one is probably a good example there, and that we had some internal staff that could kind of take on that role and responsibility. My goal, and of course it's it's always challenging to kind of stick with the timelines, but my thought is that each of these is about a 1 year process. So we've got 4 that are kind of in the works, just really kind of getting kicked off. Maybe get those about half, maybe 3/4 done, and then kick off the other 3, and hoping to have these wrapped up in like 2, maybe 3 years tops or something like that. So, um,
Okay.
but yeah, no specific priority, but we did kind of like grab a few of these to kind of kick off first, and allowing the other ones to kind of sit back for a little while longer.
Okay, great. We have another few more questions here. One is, how has your TSMO strategic and tactical plans helped to make the case for funding?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. One that we probably still haven't totally answered and stuff like that. But I think what it'll do is it'll help really kind of show those funding needs. For an example, in terms of like our ITS deployments, we got kind of a set aside for ITS deployments across the state at $1.8 million a year. That, as part of some of our planning efforts, is going to be increased to $3 million a year. And that's part of our MnSHIP investment plan, which is our state highway investment plan. And so we've got a kind of a TSMO component there of like wanting to increase that dollar amount. But there was a lot of question of like, well, can you really kind of show that you truly need this 3 million? And so I think that's where the traffic management system plan can maybe help solidify that a little bit better, and likely show that we'll probably need way more than 3 million. And then I think even with like our transportation asset management plan with the TAMP, and tying that to kind of the tactical plans, that'll really kind of show some of the funding gaps that we have in terms of just maintaining and life cycle costs of our existing systems. So I think it'll just really help reinforce some of the messages that we're already trying to get across in some of our funding requests, and in having more data behind these requests.
Okay. A few more questions came through here. How are you tracking your TSMO efforts?
Yeah, I would say, I think these tactical plans will kind of do that in terms of helping identify those strategies. The tactical plans are probably going to be updated like every 5 years. So we'll kind of try to look for more, short and midterm type projects that we want to do. Then we can go back and kind of look at these tactical plans and say, okay, what did we accomplish? How do we want to then, update those as time goes on? Either bringing on new projects, or continuing or modifying, projects that we had on there from previous updates. And then as part of these kind of tactical plans, we'll be developing some of those performance measures, to really identify, okay, are we meeting our original intent of these projects, so that we're not just deploying things for the sake of deploying these. So whether it's looking at were there safety goals, were there mobility goals, et cetera, that we really were trying to achieve, and making sure that we can kind of show that, to continue to show the sustainability and the need for these type of projects.
And as part of that, do you anticipate using any consultant support on that, or and then what type of funding is going to basically be used to handle that?
Yeah, I think with the tactical plans, like I said, a lot of these will have some consultant support. As we get into the specific projects, it might depend on the project, but yeah, certainly there'll be, some consultant support in developing the projects, and maybe some stuff done internally. So it'll be a mix, but I think that's something we'll continue to figure out as kind of time goes on. But yeah, there'll probably be some support too, depending on the project, of data analysis type things, if we really need to figure out kind of the cost benefit analysis or something like that, depending on the strategy. Some areas like our signal operations, we do have some performance measures there, and in terms of like how frequently are we going out and doing retiming. And so there's ones like that we can simply track internally, just in terms of are we hitting these major corridors every 3 years is kind of our goal, and what percentage of these corridors have we done in that within that timeline. Things like that we can track fairly straightforward, but as things get maybe more complicated, we might need additional support if our internal staff can't handle it.
Okay, and then is your DOT using the needs identified in those plans to apply for any federal grants, like Attain or other types of grants?
Yeah, that would be a goal as well. These are all kind of like the wish list items still, and kind of where we're intending to go with that. I think that's something we have struggled with over the last couple of years, is seeing all these different grants and these different NOFOs coming out, and it's like, gosh, we'd really like to submit something, but we're just not ready. And I think that's where these tactical plans can maybe start to identify some of those strategies, so that we can, ultimately get down to some projects that we could submit for a grant application. We submitted one related to signal operations in the last go around that was kind of related to GPS-based EVP systems. But I think we could kind of take a step back and kind of look at that a little bit more holistically, and maybe some new technology we want to add to that, and have a much, better grant proposal in the future, and be much better prepared for those type of opportunities that arise through the use of these tactical plans. So.
Great. Okay, last question. Once you have all of these plans in place, or even your strategic plan, how is that disseminated through the rest of the DOT, and how do you just streamline that through all your processes?
Yeah, good question. I think it'll be shared with leadership, and we have a leadership committee for TSMO that kind of spans a lot of the different divisions and offices within the department. Certainly going out and doing a lot of outreach to various kind of functional groups and specialty groups out there, whether it's like our construction folks or maintenance folks, et cetera. And so it's kind of part of that goal number 3 of really trying to create that TSMO culture across the department. And that's something, we work at all the time. I don't think I wouldn't say we're there yet. I think we still actually have a long ways to go in that regard. But I think, kind of using the example of how we have like a line item in there for ITS within our Minship plan, but just the questions of like, do you really need that much money or not? And how are you going to use that? I think to be able to bring a tactical plan and show the strategies and show the needs and where we want to deploy, and having that background information will help justify those numbers that we're asking for, and hopefully be able to increase some of those numbers that we're asking for.